Hello, my people. I totally am going to take a sip of coffee and make you wait for just a second. Now that we have that taken care of, my friends. So our module 62 is going to be on trait theory, and I want us to now put on our biological caps because we are going to be looking at personality through biology. So super fun, my friends. Let's hang in there and let's get started. So trait perspective, right? So remember, trait perspective, we are now looking at the bio lens of personality, okay? So a trait is a relatively stable predisposition to consistently behave in a certain way, and it gets stronger over time, right? So when we think of a trait that someone has, it is a biological predisposition. So, for example, some families have a predisposition for anger, right? A trait that accompanies their personality, and that's why some people have to go to anger management, right? Because some biology, right, some brains have you more prone to certain traits, right? So that leads us to trait theory. And the trait theory of personality focuses on identifying, describing, and measuring individual differences in a behavioral predisposition. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. Focuses on identifying, describing, and measuring individual differences in behavioral predispositions. So traits that can accompany our personality, but we see them through behaviors, right? And so if we look at these two rooms, I would usually ask you all, which room is yours? Feel free to comment on this if you wanted to tell me which room is yours. I'm leaning more towards this side, my friends, but we all know I'm a type B, so we can all kind of tell. But even like, so my past TAs would like clean my desk once a month and I wouldn't ask, but they're just like, I can't do it at this age. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. It's organized chaos. So let's move on. So our first, so we're talking about trait theory, and within this realm, we have theories of personality that is seen through these trait theories and through our traits. And so Eysenck's theory of personality. So Eysenck is a name we want to know. So Eysenck is our first guy, and I would definitely highlight Eysenck's theory of personality. He believes that there is two basic dimensions of personality rated on a continuum. So it's almost like it's like on a spectrum, right? And the first one is his first spectrum, right? So you'll see it on the next page. But he believes that extroversion and introversion is one of the continuum. So are you more extroverted where you're socially outgoing, active and lively, or are you more introverted where thoughtful, reserved and quiet, right? So this is his first continuum. And then he also compares it to the emotional stability continuum. So what emotional stability in Eysenck's eyes mean is, are you easygoing, relaxed, well-adjusted, even-tempered? So do you have your emotions kind of, under control, all that fancy stuff. Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze. Anyway, and then on our other end, we have emotional instability, which is people who are moody, anxious, restless, Emotional instability doesn't sound like you're emotionally unstable. It just means that you are kind of battling, right? Different moods. And if you don't have, and it goes with emotional intelligence, right? So you want to have a really good grasp on your feelings. And so what this looks like in Eysenck's realm is this. It looks like this. You don't have to copy this down. Maybe if in your notes you just want to like draw like a little pie and just kind of see so you guys see how the emotional unstable to emotionally stable is going this way, and then introverted to extroverted is going this way. We call emotionally unstable neurotic actions, but you can still just say emotionally unstable, and we all know it's the same thing. And so we kind of fall on this continuum, right? So Sally, who could be extroverted, right? And so now once we decide that she's more on the extroverted end, we're going to see where does she fall on this extroverted? Is she emotionally unstable? Is she emotionally stable? So, when I'm thinking of myself, let's think of Miss H. So I would say I'm on the extroverted side, and I believe I'm emotionally stable. And so essentially leadership, I hope I have some, carefree, lively, easygoing, responsive, talkative. My friends, we know that's me, right? So that's how we kind of can see how these personality traits are on kind of this little pie continuum, right? So this is Eisenach's theory. All right, so let's move on to our next theory. Dun, dun, dun. So we have my big five factor theory got a little cut off, but big five factor theory. Make sure we highlight it and put a star next to it because the AP test loves our big factor model. And the big five personality theory is simple. It bridges the gaps of the earlier theories and it's kind of put together by these 5 aspects. And the big 5 factor model is actually used a lot today still. We'll go through each of them together, but something to know, there is a mnemonic that I want you guys to notice. It spells canoe. It spells canoe. So in your notes, I would definitely write canoe next to it, or the old one used to be ocean. No one likes ocean anymore, so people went with canoe. Up to you. But canoe, make sure we have that written down because it is a great mnemonic, because the AP test will say like, oh, which of these factors of the big 5 factor model don't belong? And you're like, right? Like what's going to go happen? So let's explain what each of these are. So when we think of, and these are all on a continuum. So imagine this as a shortened down version of Eisenach's and more direct. So, and this is dictated by a bunch of questions that go along with this test. So when we think of, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, open to experience. So openness would be essentially the word, and extroversion. These are the traits that it's like kind of like how Eisenach had his 2 spectrums. This is the spectrum that the big 5 theory uses. So we have conscientiousness. Are you organized versus disorganized? Are you careful versus careless? Are you self-disciplined versus weak-willed? So these are the questions that would be asked that fall under conscientiousness for personality traits. The next one is agreeableness. Are you soft-hearted or ruthless? Are you trusting or are you suspicious? Are you helpful or are you uncooperative, right? So again, these aspects and traits all fall under agreeableness lens, okay, all under this little spectrum. And then remember, we have neuroticism, right? So neuroticism is emotional stability, right? So remember, we talked about that with Eisenach's for his spectrum. All right, our next one is openness to experience. And I'm going to move myself out of the way since I'm kind of getting in your way. All right, there you go. So you're just gonna have to listen to my beautiful voice without any, without any face action. So openness to experience. This is where we look at imaginative versus down to earth, variety versus routine, independent versus conforming, right? So again, these little aspects all fall under the openness aspect of the big factor model. And last but not least, we have extroversion, which is, so introversion versus extroversion is really kind of a staple of personality theories. So it's a really big aspect of it, right? So extroversion, are you more social, or do you like to, stay by yourself? Fun loving, and sober doesn't mean, in the alcohol sense, but like, are you kind of reserved and like to yourself? And are you affectionate or are you reserved, right? So these 5, there I am again, they make up the big 5 factor model. And, again, I just want you to maybe pick, so this is canoe, maybe pick one of these to remember for conscientiousness, pick one of these to remember for agreeableness, just in case you want to, if you need to write about it in any aspect, right? But just in case. So I would maybe highlight one to go with each one that connects the most with you, so you can still get kind of more detail if you need to. So that's the big 5 factor theory. So real quick, so Costa and McCree are the ones that created this personality inventory, and they came up with the big 5 factor theory. They created over 240 questions that measure this big factor 5 model. So all those traits you saw in those spectrums, right? So if we go back, these all have questions that are able for people to answer to see which way they lean, right? So there's pre-created questions for this test. I also believe it's expensive to take the actual one, my friends. But again, we all know that. That's usually the gist. So real quick, coming back to how we test personality tests, there is one main one, and it's called It's a really long one. Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory. You could totally call it just the MMPI. It's the most widely used and researched clinical use, well, the clinical usage for personality tests. So essentially, this test was originally identified for people who have emotional disorders. So this falls under abnormal psych, but this personality inventory test is now, it was developed, it's kind of more of a broad sense now, and it is used most often in, psychiatry. When we get into abnormal, there's some personality traits that are, sorry, that was my phone. So there's some personality traits that are connected to abnormal behavior, like antisocial personality disorder for anyone who's diving into the deep end of abnormal. So antisocial personality disorder would be, so if we thought that a child had that trait and was showing signs of neglecting animals or hurting them or being antisocial and not showing empathy. It's so essentially antisocial personality disorder, which can be tested through the MMPI, is a lead into psychopathic disorders, which we'll talk about later, but that's how an example of how the MMPI is used. So it's like essentially like the clinically used one through psychiatry. And just kind of going over through traits. So when we talk about trait stability, right, and we look at it from over time, and here, let me move my little camera so you can see the full thing. So what they find is that traits appear to be stable, or shall I say stabilize over time, right? So when we think of personalities, it's hot. It would be an unfair thing to do to judge a child's personality and who they would be for the rest of their life, right? Because the most growth, so, something I always tell everyone is that the most personality I shouldn't say the most personality, the time where your personality is to change the most and to adapt and to kind of come into who you are is from teenagehood to about 23. So who you are now might be your future self might be pretty different after college, or after you turn 23, after you have life experiences right outside of your home. So what they find is that after college and kind of around 25, 30ish, that's when our traits become the most dominant, and that's who we are. So essentially, if you've ever heard of, like, for example, my Nana, right? So she is a chain smoker, and my mother keeps on telling her, like, you need to change, like, a lot. And it's almost like, she has her personality. I mean, this is who she is. She's 89 years old, and it's like, is she really going to change now, right? So it's kind of like, you can't, it's like the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks or something, right? But again, our traits stabilize over time. And just some fun little facts, because twins and personality and heredity is so interesting to me. So for those who don't know, I don't know, I think I've told everyone, but I am marrying a identical twin. I know. So my fiance, there's two of them. Oh my gosh, it's awful. I'm just kidding. Jake's awesome. But it's really interesting how their personalities were it was very more similar in high school, and now they're very, very different personality wise. But again, we have to think of behavior genetics, right? So these fields that study the effects of genes and how nature and nurture, they were nurtured in the same environment, right? But then after they both went to Diablo Valley College for sports, water polo, and then they kind of branched off, and that's where the differences started to form, right? So just this example, these twins share common genes along with common interests, including the fact that they're both awesome concert pianists, right? And professors of music. Like, what are you know what I mean? So it's like, twins are so interesting, right? So nature and nurture. And essentially what the question is their genetic basis of personality trait? And they say, of course, 50%, right? Come from genetics. So our last slide for our module 62 for trait theory, of course, we have to assess this perspective, right? Not all perspectives are accepted, right? Or not accepted, but they're criticized. So, and also for this last one, you only need to write one bullet point. So real quick, criticisms of trait theories. Does not explain human personality. labels of general predispositions behave a certain way, and essentially there's not enough answered with trait theory, right? It's only the biological sense. It does not explain the development of individual differences, so like part genetic, but also it doesn't talk anything about environment because it's through the trait theory, right? So so that'd be a whole different lens, right? And then also people say it does not address important personality issues. You can pick one that you would like to write down. I'll move my face out of the way, but these are just some questions. I want you to write one down. What about basic motives that drive human personality? What about the roles of unconscious mental processes, right? So how do beliefs about the self influence personality? And then how does psychological growth and change occur, right? So these are just some things that it doesn't answer. And so this is the last slide for our trait theory, and we're gonna end it with one more video that will cover module 63 and 64. All right, my friends, you almost got this. We're almost there.